Good morning and welcome to our Wednesday morning back to basics video, and this morning we're going to be talking about the basics of stamping, actually transferring that ink from your stamp to your paper, which obviously is the backbone of everything that we do here at Stamping Up, and we're all about the stamping. So that's what I'm hoping to share with you today, some sort of basics and some tips to get the best out of your experience of stamping, because I meet so many people that tell me that they can't stamp, they're no good at stamping, all of those things. But like with every skill, it is about learning tips and tricks and techniques. It's about what works really, and so I am, as always at this stage, trying to share this across to my Stamping Starters page. So I'm fiddling about with that at the moment, and we will see if that will let us share that in just a second. But in the meantime, while I'm fiddling with that, I haven't introduced myself. My name is Helen Jennings. I'm a Stampin' Up demonstrator here in the UK, and I have been a demonstrator for just coming up for 6 years, but been card making for a lot longer than that, probably about 17 or 18, but actually haven't been stamping for as long as that, because for the first little while that I was card making, I would have put myself, morning dawn, I'd have put myself into that bracket of people that don't stamp. Hadn't quite got the hang of that. So that's why it's my passion now to come in and share these things with other people that are just starting out on their journey. So I have a little crib sheet in front of me, a little things that I'm hoping to remember to tell you. I've got a cup of tea as always. I've got a glass of water. So hopefully we shall be good to keep going for the sort of, 20 minutes, half an hour that this little group will take us. Let me just type in the name of the group that I'm trying to share this across to. Did that click or did it not? I do really need an admin person here for the first thing on a Wednesday morning. One day, come the revolution. Oh, no idea what it's doing now. Okay, I'll leave that clicking away in the background. So, stamping, the basics of stamping. Hello, Megan. Oh, now
okay.
Let's do that. We don't want to hear me talking, do we, in the background? Right, hopefully that is going to post. We'll leave that to do its thing. Okay, so stamping. I've got in front of me my blocks, I've got some stamps, I've got some ink. The first thing that I would say is, as with anything that you do, you want to try and go for the best quality products that you can. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about the most expensive, but I'm talking about the best quality. Hi, Chrissy. Because for lots of people, the reason that they've had bad experiences of stamping is not necessarily anything about them or about what they were doing. It is purely about what they were using. So if you've not got stamps that are up for the job, or you've not got inks that are up to the job, then you're not going to get a quality result. So you can go away thinking, it's me, I'm hopeless, I can't stamp. And actually it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with thank you, Megan, cheers. It has everything to do with the items that you're using. It's a hot cup of tea as well, Megan. I've just literally made it. So that's all good. It probably won't be by the end of this video. So yeah, so quite often we can get things like we get stamps free on the front of magazines, or you might have been tempted to buy some sort of cheapy internet stamps and things, and then you might have found that they don't stamp very well. Well, both of those things, I mean, our stamps on the front of magazines, they're really lovely. I've got quite a collection as well. But obviously, in order to put them free on the front of magazines, they have been quite cheaply mass produced. So that means they're not going to be produced of the best quality materials. And they're not going to be produced with the same love and care as a stamp that has been packaged to be put on the shop floor to sell to you, or in your catalogue, or wherever it is that you've got it from. So they are going to be made of different materials. They're not going to be the top quality materials. You'll probably find they're a lot more jelly-like perhaps than stamps that you would otherwise have. They might have some imperfections in them. So it may not be about your stamping technique. It may be about what you've used, and the same with ink. Obviously cheaper inks, they might be a bit more watery, they might not have as much pigment in them. You know, there'll be lots of reasons why they are cheaper, and that will be because they've been cheaper to produce. So that's the first thing. Go for the best quality that you can possibly go for. As I say, not necessarily the most expensive, but the best quality. So go for good quality products. You get lots of different sorts of stamps, and we've talked about that in an earlier video. We've talked about the photopolymer, we've talked about the rubber stamps and all of those sorts of things. And we've talked a little bit about blocks. I've got my whole set of blocks here. So this is the full collection of Stampin' Up! Blocks in the case that you could get them in to house them. My blocks look as if they could do with a bit of a clean, but that's not going to stop them functioning. So my first tip is, once you've decided on what stamp you're going to use, and let's pick one of these photopolymer ones. So this is the beautiful bouquet set. I picked this one especially because it has got lots and lots of small stamps in it. So you've got lots of sentiments, lots of flowers and things. So let's say I was going to pick, for instance, this flower just here. Now you'll notice that this is a little bit miscoloured, but that's perfectly okay. Photopolymer stamps do stain, particularly if you use anything that's got any red dye in it, so any purples, reds, oranges, anything like that, it's going to stain. Now my first tip is you want to try and get the nearest block to the size of stamp. So obviously this block here is going to be too small and it's going to overhang. Okay, so that wouldn't work because you wouldn't get an even pressure on your stamp. This stamp block, I would think here, would be the one that I would pick. So you can see that your stamp fits nicely on it, but you've not got too much of a board around the edge. But it may be that I don't have that size block. Perhaps the only size block I've got is this one, or even this one. So what do we suggest then? Do we say that we can't use these stamps? No, absolutely not. But what I would suggest you do, particularly if you were using a bigger block like this, is that to stop it, because what you don't want to do as you're stamping, you don't want it to rock and wobble. So if you were using a big block like this, what I would suggest you do, excuse me, I'm hoping my voice is going to hold out. It has been a bit variable. What I would suggest you do is just take a couple of smaller stamps that you're not going to be inking up and you're not going to be using, pop those on your block, and what they will do is give it some stability. So if we take those off, that is going to rock. If we pop those on, it's not going to rock. So that helps you to keep that stamp stable when you're stamping. So if your block, you've only got a couple of blocks and your block is much too big for the stamp that you've got, then pick out a couple of smaller stamps and just use those. You don't need to ink them up. In fact, you don't want to ink them up. You're just going to use them to stabilize your block. But otherwise, go for the nearest size that you've got. So it's always good to have a good variety of blocks. Go for the nearest block to the size of your stamp. So that's tip number one. Choose the right size block, and if necessary, balance it. Okay, so that's our first tip. let's pop that there just for a minute. The second thing is to think about what it is that you are trying to do. What are you actually trying to do when you are stamping? Let's pick one of these up. This is one of the ones out of the autumn winter catalogue. This is the Peaceful Boughs. Actually, I've picked this one deliberately because I haven't put my stickers on this yet. So let's take this pine cone stamp. Oh, we're not going to put the sticker on it because I've obviously left the sticker in the other room. That won't matter. Where I was going to pop the sticker on for you live, but we'll do that another day. Let's just take the back off of here for now because it is still cling. And that's going to be that same block. Choose a block for it. Now, what are we trying to do with this stamp? Now, if you look at this stamp, you can see that it's sort of engraved, and this picks up better on the rubber ones and perhaps does on the photopolymer ones. So you've got this image that has been engraved into the rubber. So there it is, and it's got bobbles in it, and it's got higher bits, lower bits, sort of dimension, all sorts of things going on the layer of that stamp. So what we want to do when we are stamping is what we are basically doing is we want to cover the surface of that stamp, just this surface bit here, with a layer of ink. And then we want to transfer that layer of the ink onto paper. And what we're doing as we press down on the paper is we're transferring the image from the top of that stamp. We just want the top layer of that stamp. So we're transferring the image from the top layer of that stamp onto our card. So that's what we want to do. We want to cover this top of this stamp with a layer of ink, and then we want to transfer that ink onto paper so that we get an image, a reverse image of whatever is on the top of that stamp. So that's what we're aiming to do. Now that might sound a bit obvious and a bit silly, but it's always worth sort of keeping that in the back of your mind, that that is actually what you are trying to do. So let me just pop those blocks to one side for a minute. Let me bring in my nice shiny new trimmer and a piece of A4 card. And let me cut this piece of A4 card in half at 14.9 centimetres. Obviously this is irrelevant what size they are really, but we're going to cut it in half again at 10.5 centimetres, and that cut through that beautifully, didn't it, those two layers. So now we've got 4 little bits of card that we can play about with doing some stamping. So we have our block, we've chosen our block, we've got our stamp. Okay, and now here I've got a whole variety of inks. They're not necessarily going to be the colours that you would choose to stamp up these stamps, but hey ho, let's go with a terracotta tile pine cone. So we want to put a layer of ink. That's our first step, a layer of ink onto that stamp. Now I don't know about you, but when I was a little girl I used to play post offices. And what you'd do when you were playing post offices is you'd get your stamp and you'd push it really hard down into your ink pad, squash it down there, really, you know, get all that ink on. You don't want to do that. Because if you do that, you don't just get ink on that surface just there. You get ink all around the edge of your block, you get ink all around the edge of your stamp. And what the danger is then is when you transfer that to your card to go to make your impression, not only do you get this surface image, but you also get blobs all around everywhere that you don't want. So we don't want to be squashing our stamp into our ink pad. What we're looking to do is just to put a surface covering of ink. So we do that by tap, tap, tapping. Now you can tap, tap, tap 2 ways. If this was a big stamp, so if I had chosen to do this big bow just here, let's again pop that out. If I'd have chosen to do this big stamp, I would have had that on its block, which is probably going to be, oh, that one might fit. That would be a bit dodgy. I think we're going to go with this one. So we'd have had that stamp on that block just there. In fact, let's do it. Let's not hypothesize. That's a good word, isn't it, for this time on a Wednesday morning? So we'd have had this one on this block just here. Now what I would do is I would lay that block down like that, leave it on the table upside down, and I would pick up my ink pad and I'm going to go tap, tap, tap. Now what we are thinking of, what I want you to think about is the fact that you are patting a baby's bottom. You are not squashing a fly. Okay, I didn't come up with that, but I love it, and I have said it so many times to people. Tapping a baby's bottom, not squashing a fly. So we are going to go tap, 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 all over the top of that stamp, and we want to make sure that we've covered all round, that it's got a good covering of ink on. Okay, so we've tap, tap, tapped. And then what we're going to do is we're going to hold it onto our paper. So we just want to hold it onto our paper. We want to make sure that every area of that stamp has had good contact with the paper. But what we don't want to do is squash it. So you want to be firm, but you're not looking to squash it. And you hold it in place and you say to yourself, and again, this isn't mine, this is somebody else's, but you say to yourself, Helen is wonderful, Helen is wonderful, Helen is wonderful. Insert your own name at that point. You could say that Megan is wonderful, or Dawn is wonderful, or whoever it is that is stamping. And in the time that you have said, Helen is wonderful, Helen is wonderful, Helen is wonderful, what happens is the ink from that stamp soaks in to the paper, and that's what you want it to do. You know, you're just aiming for the ink to come off of the stamp and to soak into the paper, and that's what we've done just there. Let me find my Simply Chamois, because we need to clean our stamps up. Some people use baby wipes. You have to be careful with baby wipes that they're alcohol free and all sorts of things, but obviously this day and age we always have to be careful of the environment. So our Simply Chamois are just brilliant, because all you would do, you keep them damp, every now and then you run them under the tap. They do get stained, but that doesn't matter. They are tools, not jewels. Right, so for that one we kept our block on the surface and we tap, tap, tapped. This is a smaller one. So you could do likewise. You could leave it down and you could tap your ink, but you could also take your stamp to your ink pad. So this time let's put our ink pad down, pick up our stamp, but we're going to do exactly the same. Tap, tap, tap. Patting a baby's bottom, not squashing a fly, until we're happy that we've got a good ink coverage on there. And then again, holding it firmly but not squashing it. Helen is wonderful, Helen is wonderful, Helen is wonderful. And there we have a beautiful pine cone. So that's your basics idea of what you're doing with stamping, is that you want to transfer your ink. You want enough ink on the stamp to cover the image, and then you want to transfer that ink to the paper. So no squashing, no really squashing your stamps down on the card. Rubber ones aren't quite so bad, but if you really squash a photopolymer stamp, you might find that it starts to splay out and get a bit of a squidgy image, which is what you don't want. Let's go back to that little stamp that we had just there, because we know that fits on that block. Exactly the same thing. Let's tap, tap, tap. Now with a photopolymer stamp, I think we talked about this when we spoke about stamps, they're not as deep. So you see instantly I've already got a little bit of ink on that corner of that block just there. The stamp itself isn't so deep, so it is very easy to pick ink up on the edge of your block, but when you're stamping with these, you've got this layer of foam. So you get your rubber stamp and you get your layer of foam. With a photopolymer stamp, you don't get that layer of foam. So what is a good tip is to get yourself a foam mat of some sort, an old mouse mat. Our foam mats are perfect, obviously, because they're made for the job. But tap, 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 tap. Make sure that you're happy that you've got your ink coverage with your foam mat underneath. Hold it in place firmly but not squashing. Helen is wonderful, Helen is wonderful, Helen is wonderful. And there we have our little flower. That's quite a dark colour for a flower, but you can actually see quite a lot of detail. Let's do what I said not to do. Right, so I'm pressing that into that ink pad. Can you see all that ink around the edge where I've pressed it? And then I'm going to press it onto my paper. Really squidge it down, and you can see that we've got ink all around the edge. We've got ink where the block was, this is all sprayed out, and if you look at the difference in those two images, the stamp has splayed out. So you really don't want to be pressing down ever so hard. You also, the thing is, if you press really hard into your ink pads, you get left, you can tell if people have done it, because you get left with an impression in your ink pad. It also makes it much harder to clean up, because ink's got down into all those little grooves, and you didn't want ink in those little grooves, you only needed it on the surface. The little grooves you wanted to stay clear. Right, there we go. So that's your basics of stamping. Tap, 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 patting a baby's bottom, not squashing a fly, and holding it firmly onto the paper to the count of Helen is wonderful, whoever is wonderful 3 times. So that's your basics of stamping. We have some other stamps, so some stamps that cause us a few more challenges, but are utterly wonderful. One of them is these huge big background stamps. I love these background stamps. Now we have got a huge block that fits these background stamps, but it is very unwieldy to hold. I mean, I've only got relatively small hands. I would really struggle to hold that and to get a good image with it. So what I have tended to do with these in the past is either you can mount it on your block, or just as long as your table is a good solid surface, you can just stick it on your table, because these are background images, so they're not normally hugely detailed images. You're just trying to get a background image. So either say on your block or on your table if your table is good and solid. So what I have done traditionally is I would leave that stamp on the table like that. Ooh. Ink it up, tap, 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 but just remember you've got a long way to go. There's a lot of tapping on these because you've got a lot of stamp and you want all of that surface to have ink on it. Tap, tap, tap all the way round. But then with these stamps, what I would do is I would lay my card over the top like that. Take a scrap piece of paper and give it a good rub. So you are getting that good contact with your stamp, but you're doing it by rubbing on it. So this is traditionally the way I have done background stamps. So there's your background stamp. Much easier than trying to wield that huge big block. But we do have something else these days that make background stamps easier, and actually can make any of your stamping easier. So if you are somebody that has some dexterity problems, if you are somebody that has found in the past that you have huge problems with overstamping, so overstamping is when you get these sort of problems here. What we do have now is a stamp positioning tool, and stamp positioning tools are fabulous, and we shall do a whole thing on Stamparatus and some of the things that you can do with it at some point, because that's the name of our particular stamping positioning tool. Obviously the best on the market. I'm only slightly biased on that, but there are features of ours that aren't available in any of the other stamp positioning tools. So you get 2 of these plates with it. You get your base, you get your foam mat, so that if you're using a photopolymer stamp, you need your foam mat in. If you're using a rubber stamp, you don't need your foam mat in. And we've also got this wonderful grid paper you can buy separately. You can buy additional plates separately, and it comes with 2 magnets, and you can get additional magnets because they are very brittle and can break. Mine have got washi tape on just because if they do snap together for any reason, they are incredibly difficult to get apart. So by having some washi tape on, it just helps ease that process if that happens. I seem to have dimensional backs stuck on the back of my stamp. Right, I'm going to lay this stamp down on here. So this is the other way that you can do these background stamps without having to wield those great big blocks. So put your stamp, your big block, big stamp onto your Stamparatus, and let's find, in fact let's just turn that over. Now I'm not going to put magnets on it because it would stop the stamping in this instance. I think we're going to go about there. Does that look as if that's going to be, yeah, relatively right, I think. Okay, let's have a different colour this time. Let's go with a pretty peacock background. So I've got my stamp on my plate. Exactly the same process. I'm going to tap, 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 tap. Because of the way this works, if you do get ink on your plate, it's very unlikely to transfer to your card front. So that is something really useful for anybody that does have any particular problems with that and doesn't seem to be able to rectify it any other way. Or if you have a job to hold the blocks and things, this is a much bigger platform to use. So we've inked that up as we would have done if we'd have had it on the block or on the table. We're just going to bring that down and we're going to press, press, press all over. So obviously you're able to get a nice even pressure. And the other nice thing about this is what I could have done is popped a little glue dot or something on the back of that card if I'd have been worried. And then if I hadn't got a nice coverage first time over, because it wouldn't have moved, I could re-ink it. And obviously if you've got smaller pieces of cards and you're doing smaller images, you use your magnets to anchor your paper down so that you know that's not moving, you know that's not moving. You can go in and stamp a second time, which is the beauty of the Stamparatus. But as I said, we'll talk about the Stamparatus on its own another week. But that is another way of using those big background stamps, because they can be a bit tricky, but they're fabulous to use. But the Stamparatus gives you another way. So either put them down on your table or on your big block and take an impression off of it that way, or turn it over and put it onto your Stamparatus and use it on that stamping platform instead. So hopefully that's given you the basics of stamping. So the idea that you just need to cover the surface of that stamp with your ink and transfer it to your paper, and you do that by tap tap tapping, patting a baby's bottom, not squashing a fly, and then just holding it in place firmly but not squashing it, and saying to yourself whatever your name is. Chrissy is wonderful, Chrissy is wonderful, Chrissy is wonderful. And then as you lift it, you should have found that the ink has transferred from your stamp and has soaked into your paper, which is what we wanted to do, without any over stamping, without any blobbiness or squishing of your stamp. So thank you for joining me today, and I will be back tomorrow. I said this famously last week, but I see no reason at this moment why I shouldn't be back tomorrow to do some crafting with the Harvest Hellos. So see you then.